All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Asra Nomani is the bête noire of the woke left. She is attacked by what she calls the honor brigade of the alphabet soup of leftist causes, which are all running what is tantamount to an information campaign. They're all the same people over and over and over again. And she is in their way and has been for decades. And this virulent group of, well, in some ways, violent people have been after her for a very long time. And if you've ever wondered where this woke army came from and with such sudden ferocity, Nomani's book called Woke Army is a must read. She includes the family tree of these seemingly unrelated organizations in the pages of her new book, Woke Army. She reverse engineers where attacks come from and where they were coming from her and at her as a liberal Muslim woman. And what she found is staggering and insightful, even if you think you know. You don't know. Now, an entire array of organizations came after her who were joined by ultra-strict Muslims. They joined together in an attempt to convince the world, attacked by violent jihadists against the United States, for example, and for decades, that was really all their fault. And they were just Islamophobes. And where did that come from? There's much more to it than that. But if you've ever wondered how a Muslim woman could be as far left as Ilhan Omar and Rakita Tlaib and how they could be on the squad, you need to read Woke Army. More recently, my guest has made waves by outing the left's war on merit in public schools in Virginia, which made national news. We have previously had Asra Nomani on this podcast, the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. And that's where she informed me that she's a mama bear. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. Asra Nomani, how are you doing today?
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be talking to you. I feel like you're going to help me connect the dots for everybody so well. And you've already captured so just profoundly 20 years of work that I've done. I can't believe it's been decades. It feels like yesterday that I just stepped up to the front door of my mosque in Morgantown, West Virginia. But long before I became a mama bear activist, you're absolutely right. I was in the crosshairs of this thing this network that I call the Woke Army. And I'm so happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah, you give a fascinating rundown of the center of the universe in Islam, for example, where you talk about in Virginia, you going to the mosque there. But there was a, what did they call it? A Islamic not jihad, but the area of the Virginia, the state of Virginia, where there is so much activity by Muslims at lots of mosques and that sort of thing. But yet it was also the cradle of some of the organizations and cross-pollination of organizations that you confronted years later. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's just so shocking. I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia. So across the border from where I'm sitting right now. And there I grew up, just living the American life. I ran track and came up to the issues of Islam in my own life because I was a child of the 70s and it was the 80s that brought to America this really strict interpretation of Islam that some people might have heard of as Wahhabism coming from Saudi Arabia, or sometimes it's called Salafism, which is also a very puritanical interpretation of Islam. And it is that Islam that had a cousin of mine scold me and say that I was haram or illegal because I was wearing shorts as a runner on my track team at Morgantown High School.
Wow.
But I had parents, Victoria, I had parents though who ignored him and let me just find my stride literally in America. And that's how I became a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and, traveled the world. Well, I had a baby in the fall of 2002. I brought him to Virginia for work. I had got work in the area teaching journalism at Georgetown University, and I could not believe it. But right down the road from me, literally just a few miles away, is the birthplace of the Muslim Brothers in America settling and creating this hub for that Islamist movement that is the term that we use to describe political Islam, that Islam that was coming up against my life as a little girl, saying that I was illegal for wearing shorts in America. But that network is down the road from me here across this road called Route 7. And that artery that you're talking about that runs through Fairfax County, Virginia, it's called a Wahhabi Corridor.
A Wahhabi Corridor.
Yeah.
That was Alaki's mosque as well.
Yeah, because there on both sides of Route 7 is, these institutions that put forward this Islamist ideology into the world. And one of those places is this mosque called Darul Hijra Mosque. And that mosque is where a young man named Anwar al-Awlaki got hired as an imam or preacher. And he is the man who ends up fleeing to Yemen and getting killed as a U.S. citizen in a drone attack by former President Obama, because he was one of the recruiters for Al-Qaeda, living right down the road, preaching right down the road at the mosque that was also known as the 9/11 Mosque, because we had hijackers praying there. So that's
we had hijackers, and in San Diego. He also went to San Diego to cross-pollinate with the two other 9/11 hijackers. He was a bad dude, but Obama took him out in a drone strike, and he also took out the guy who wrote, what was the sort of younger version, it's all just memory hold now.
Yes.
The magazine for jihadists, there were a couple of them. He took out the editor of that guy too, or that magazine as well.
And
Obama
that's
did.
what happened is, what the sort of memory gap that we got, that's what these Islamists have wanted to do over these last 20 years. Because this issue of extremism and women's rights, it's the Achilles heel for their whole movement in the 21st century. It's not very compatible with the 21st century to say that a woman's got to walk through the back door, right? And then claim to be aligned with the Democratic Party and progressive left. So that's that contradiction. And that's what happened for me as a woman, is that I never went to my mosque when I was growing up in West Virginia. But after 9/11, I had this tragedy of going to Pakistan and having my dear, dear, beautiful friend, Danny Pearl, visit me at my home that I had rented there. And Danny was my colleague from the Wall Street Journal. We'd both worked there. And, it's been 20 years, and I don't know if everybody knows and remembers his story, but he never returned from an interview for which he was supposed to come back that night. And he was brutally murdered, slaughtered, beheaded by that interpretation of Islam that I was illegal for wearing shorts.
Wasn't that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who did that?
Well, what I did then as a friend of Danny's and as a journalist is I couldn't let it go. And so, Victoria, I ended up teaching this class at Georgetown University, and that's why I ended up in Virginia. I taught a class working with 30 amazing students and a colleague, a professor, and we uncovered the entire operation.
You did? How did I not know that?
Yeah, it's so deep. It's called The Truth Left Behind, because there was this truth left behind. And why, Victoria? Because after Danny was found to have been murdered, American intelligence and law enforcement had to move on, because at that point in the summer of 2002, we didn't even know who had done 9/11. They
did too.
Well,
they knew bin Laden was.
Oh, that we knew, but we didn't know the operators, I should say. We knew bin Laden.
See.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is we didn't have any arrests of any of the men who ended up in Guantanamo, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Mm-hmm.
We only learned of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's name in the spring of 2002 after Danny had been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And so the chase was on to find Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And the truth was a casualty then.
Absolutely. Yeah. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was Ramzi Yousef's uncle, wasn't he? And and Yousef was the guy who was behind the 1993 World Trade Center tower bombing.
Yeah.
Just to connect the dots there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's a family business.
Yeah.
It's a family business and it is a long war. It is a long war. And, it didn't begin on 9/11. And my example of being that little girl, that girl who was reprimanded for wearing shorts because of this ideology, that happened in the late 70s, So it's a long indoctrination campaign that these ideologues have done in order to bring this very puritanical and also ultimately violent, right, interpretation of Islam to mosques right down the road from me. Mm-hmm. And how did I end up confronting this ideology was as a woman. I said, okay, I came back to America after poor Danny's murder. I had a baby in my belly, Victoria. I had fallen.
So if shorts were going to just send them up, having a baby out of wedlock, holy crow. It's shocking you survived, actually.
It is. I had to keep it a secret in Pakistan. I realized in the midst of trying to find Danny that I had missed this, monthly moment we're supposed to have as women. And I had to go quietly into the night to the 24-hour pharmacy across from the Karachi Sheraton. And there with these Pakistani police behind me, I walked up to the little clerk and counter and I said, I'd like to have 3 pregnancy tests, please. Because, one is never enough, right? Especially in a nation where that pregnancy test becomes the evidence against you for this moral crime of having had sex before marriage. And my boyfriend bailed on me in the midst of that dragnet to find Danny. But what I had those parents, those amazing parents who let me run as a Morgantown High Mohegan in finding my stride. And they embraced me as a mom and welcomed my son into the world. And it was with my little baby that I walked up to the front door of my mosque in Morgantown, West Virginia. And this elder greeted me and said, "Sister, take the back door." And that was like my big moment of decision. Yeah, I know. You can
imagine. Oh, no, you didn't.
No, and he was an elder from Egypt, and that was his way. That was what he had learned. And can you imagine? It's 2003 by then, 20 years ago, and yet today, same story.
My little factoid that interject here is far different. I'm not a Muslim, but after the 2014 San Bernardino shootout in which 2 jihadis went after a government building and killed a bunch of folks, of course, it was a huge fissure that occurred again between civilization and civilizational jihad. And violent jihad. And so I went to the mosque where they were radicalized. And as we're just kind of hanging out there as one of many reporters. And I went to shake the hand of one of the imams. And of course I didn't realize, I just forgot. I was just trying to be sociable and he couldn't shake my hand, but they did let us in, men and women, into one part of the mosque so that they could do a dog and pony show for us to let us know that, hey man, it's not us.
Oh yeah. No, that anecdote features big in the book because this symbol of, my religion married with the far left in the United States in order to make excuses for people like those San Bernardino killers. I will never forget. It's right here somewhere in the middle of the book. I chronicle how it is that this organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, did their dog and pony show and said, oh, it was a workplace issue. Do you remember they tried
Yes, workplace violence. Just like no, was it who's the psychiatrist at the Fort Hood? Really?
Nidal
Hassan. Yeah, Nidal Hassan. Oh, come on. He went to Al-Awlaki's mosque too.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You can't even believe this. I have to tell you this story. Oh my gosh. I'm like in the car that the TV program sometimes send to go speak at NBC News one day when they still had me on. Yeah. Larry O'Donnell would actually have me on during the entire campaign of Islamic State, because who is Islamic State targeting? Christians, right? And I, as a Muslim, was speaking honestly to this fact. And so Larry cared. And there I was driving, and you can't believe this, Victoria. I end up in the car talking about what I'm going to talk about, which is dangerous to do sometimes in the car ride. And the guy tells me, "Oh, yeah, I was friends with Nidal Hassan." I was like, oh, no.
Really?
He prayed at the Darul Hijra Mosque with Nidal Hassan, and they were buddies. And he made his excuses. And I know that game really well, but of course wanted to get safely to the destination. So I didn't argue with him. But yeah, I mean, Nidal Hassan, San Bernardino, I knew that case well, because those gunmen, the couple that did that brutality, they were indoctrinated by this interpretation of Islam that I had been seeing since I was a little girl. And the Muslim establishment did what they have been doing since 9/11, claim that it had nothing to do with Islam, but deflect them to people being Islamophobic and anti-Muslim if they dare to acknowledge the truth. And do you know what? In the book then, I've got this great little factoid. Council on American Islamic Relations got a grant then. Victoria, I hope you're sitting down. I know you are. They got a grant from who else but the Open Society Foundation.
That blew my mind. I did not know that George Soros was somehow connected to all of this. And therein lies the connective tissue with the left too, right?
Exactly. This is it. This is the alliance. And what is Open Society doing? Funding, apologists for terrorists. Well,
he does it all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's all over the world.
That's what I discovered. And I cannot even begin to tell you. I mean, I'm sure you understand just like how disheartening and disappointing and just it felt when I discovered this, because it felt like a betrayal. Like you said, I've always all my life lived these classic liberal values, I will say now. That's what I will call them, instead of that they're not misinterpreted as being aligned with the left now. They are the classic liberal values that I think conservatives agree upon, of free speech, individual liberty, live and let live, even to a great extent. Well, what the heck? They gave them a grant. This is a rapid response grant so that they could get in front of the camera. And sure enough, they had right here, I watched it on CNN, their press conference in which they did their apologetics and again gaslit America. Right? That was another tragic example of them gaslighting America with a strategy.
The scales fell from your eyes. It's the same moment I had in 1991 when the left went after a black man seeking office on the U.S. Supreme Court as a justice. What they did to Clarence Thomas was so egregious and so antithetical to what they said they stood for. I just said, "Oh, you guys are fake. I mean, you guys never really meant it. Oh, I'm been such an idiot. Oh, okay." And then I started sort of weighing things out from a different way of looking at things.
That's remarkable. And, I am slow to enlightenment sometimes.
No, hardly.
But it's true. But when I get it, I get it.
Yeah.
And what happens is I have so much evidence that I then come out with something blatant like that, right? Like even when I saw this book cover, I was shocked by the imagery. But there I was when you got your enlightenment about that, I was sitting in the newsroom at the Wall Street Journal, and guess who were my colleagues? Jill Abramson, who went on to the New York Times,
New York Times.
And Jane Mayer. And
Whoa, the New Yorker, Jane Mayer. Holy crow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I tell you, I learned investigative journalism from them.
Good.
And I used everything that I learned to expose this, because what do I do here? I wish I had the book. It's across the room. Jane ends up writing this book called Dark Money, right?
Yes.
For funding of the conservative movement.
Yes.
Well, I'm like, hello, there's another part of this that's happening, and it's the funding of the woke army. And so I took every tactic tactic is a fancy word, but every trick that I learned as a journalist, follow the money. What did Anita Hill teach us, even if it had, the politics that it did? Contemporaneous notes. That was when that word became part of vernacular, how important it was to take notes at the moment that something was happening. And this is part of this is in my toolkit, is I email myself the notes of what people are doing, what they've said, these ways to document, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
real time
movements. Yeah. And so it's really interesting that you saw that then. You're absolutely right, because then I saw the politics when I saw the woke army come forward to then sabotage Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah. 2018.
Yeah, it took me a while, but then that's when I was investigating Open Society and seeing their intrusion into our Muslim debate in the most diabolical of ways. And that's when, if you remember Brett Kavanaugh campaign, one of the people front and center was Linda Sarsour.
I didn't remember that she was one of those people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
There she was with the other, Women's March people storming the Capitol, but nobody had headline news about that, right? And they were pounding on the doors of the Supreme Court. I witnessed it all. They climbed the statue in front of the Supreme Court. And so what was this woman, a Palestinian American, doing? What's that? Yeah.
I said insurrection.
I know they don't want to apply that word, but I got to say, I was really myself as an observer shocked that they were able to intrude as far as they did.
They were allowed in.
Yeah. Who was there? I mean, it was Linda Sarsour, who is a key player in the Muslim establishment apologetics about Islamic extremism and sexism. I mean, she has been a shield for the Muslim community, worst sexism and misogyny, and then she catapults to be co-founder of the Women's March. I mean, I want to pivot there, because in 2016 the Women's March happens, and it's or 2017, I guess it's after Donald Trump, the day after Donald Trump takes office, and all of a sudden it was an existential threat that this man were in office, and so therefore we must do something to quote unquote #resist. Linda Sarsour, front and center, a woman who has antipathy toward the Jewish state and Jewish people, standing center stage at the Women's March, speaking for women and feminists, and she's a Muslim. I mean, how did that happen? Yeah, I mean, as a Muslim, I consider myself a feminist in the pure sense of the word, of equal rights. But in her Islam, we have to be very clear. They accept women as second-class citizens. And this is true in the mosque. It's true in our families. Oftentimes when a girl or a daughter gets less inheritance than a boy, because that's how it was written in the 7th century. And so they don't want to progress. The idea of the headscarf, for example, is one that, yes, a woman can make for her own choice, but we have to be really honest, just like the women in Iran are arguing, it is a dogma. And the dogma is based on a notion of rape culture, which is supposed to be very anti-feminist, right? Because the idea of the headscarf, I have here behind me a little doll that might look like she's just a regular Barbie, but the way she came to me from the UAE toy company was with her full hair covered. She is, she's a doll, and she had the full abaya on, the black gown, and this is what she wears underneath. And you'll see what I put on her one day. I went to the voting. I went to the voting.
Oh, an I voted sticker? Is that what that is?
because for too long, women. Isn't that great? I love it.
Hilarious.
I love her. Look at her. Look at her illegal, like she is.
She has
showing
legs.
her little legs, and her highlights. Well, this is a symbol of the freedom. And what happens is in this idea of the rape culture. What is rape culture? The idea that women are to be blamed if they are sexually assaulted or raped, right?
It's definitely been that way for millennia.
Yeah. So when we're told and forced to wear the headscarf, it is with the assumption that we are too sexy for our hair and that a man will be sexually aroused if he sees our hair and thus lose control of himself. And so who is blamed? Ourselves. And so this is the politically incorrect conversation that none of the Women's March people wanted to have, and Linda Sarsour was absolutely not going to have it. I dared to put that idea forward in the Washington Post one year when they took my pieces, and she was just livid. She was livid at the assertion that I made, which is that we're not Islamically required to cover our hair. But you can see now that, thankfully, the women in Iran are standing up with courage on that simple principle. And the Women's March doesn't support them, though, just like it won't support Israeli feminists. They kicked them out of the Women's March. And that's exactly that nexus of, contradiction then of, quote, feminism with really bigotry. I mean, to kick the Israeli feminists out was bigoted. It was, discriminatory. And the new intersectionality that Linda Sarsour and her little group of, co-organizers were putting forward was one in which they were flipping the hierarchy of human value in America and saying, oh, Palestinians are now above Israelis, and Israelis are actually white supremacists. So that's how they get this indoctrination of their warped worldview into people's minds.
You say that in your conversation about that in Woke Army, I got the impression that you felt it was at that point that the way in which the Women's March people, Linda Sarsour et al., then turned everything on its head was almost a Rosetta Stone for the rest of us to see how this was all going to play out. How everything would be toppled, and it would be, like the jihadist thing where you're not, they're not violent. You're just Islamophobic. I mean, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. I just have been introduced to her through you, but tell me who your last podcast guest was again.
Oh, yes. Stella Morabito, a former CIA analyst and writer for, I think she's American Greatness or The Federalist. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stella. She's awesome. And she talked about the fact that there's an information war going on, as we know, but how it was used to isolate individuals and to create a sense of fear. It was highly informative. She's a rock star.
Definitely recommend everybody listen to that podcast as you listen to this one, because the what Stella identified was the dynamics of manipulation. And one of my areas of study as a graduate student was propaganda. And I ended up becoming a journalist, trying as best as I can to write truth always. Of course, that's the endeavor. But what I was able to do was see really clearly how messages and even journalism is co-opted for the sake of propaganda. And I saw that so explicitly with the way the Women's March hijacked the minds of liberals also,
Mm-hmm.
not classic liberals, but the left and the Democratic Party, using Trump as the excuse.
Sure.
But it was a long diabolical plan, and Trump was convenient narrative for them, a great boogeyman for them.
Sure.
But what they were doing, they had laid the groundwork to do years earlier, and in woke
He was
army,
the catalyst for this latest iteration of it.
yeah,
A very powerful one.
right. And in woke army, I knew this. I chronicle this because the night of the election, I start off the book with this anecdote of the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Los Angeles, in Southern California, the same man who covered for the San Bernardino killers, declaring that the government had to be overthrown. He declared this in Arabic with the battle cry that had been said in Tahrir Square in Egypt to overthrow Hosni Mubarak, and nobody said anything. Because
I remember a ripple. I remember just a ripple, but it got lost in the ether.
Oh yeah, nobody. He's still a man out there doing his nonsense still, because he had just a little bit of a backlash, exactly. But what he did is he helped to foment this movement. Linda Sarsour across the nation then also joined this battle cry. Became part of this hashtag resist movement, right?
Yes. And they were all doing that.
Yeah. And they all took to the streets, and it was orchestrated and organized before Donald Trump had even been able to raise his hand to take over the presidency.
And it started months before that. And I will say this because I know in Portland, Oregon, sort of the epicenter of the crank nutballs of Antifa, the diabolical crank nutballs and BLM, they were in the streets, and they were burning things. They were doing all manner of beating people. That's when Proud Boys came to prominence, where they would take to the streets because these Antifa BLM types were predating upon just Trump voters. I mean, just like normal Trump voters. And they'd go downtown and they'd, hey, Trump, he's great. And then people just beat the crap out of them. And that's what, spray them, bear spray them. This, Antifa started the fight. Okay. Proud Boys got blamed for it. It's absolutely diabolical, but whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's that selective, absorption of details. And that's what I really loved about that last podcast too, was she chronicled how it is that we participate in our own sabotage. And that's a concept that I tried to capture in here, that I started off with this friend of mine, Orly Petter, who's a psychologist, and Orly has just been a great friend to me. I ended up going to Guantanamo Bay, if you can believe it, to stare at the face of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in trial. And it was just, both horrifying and freeing moment for me. I had spent, years chasing every detail of Danny Pearl's murder, but not managing and healing the grief and the tragedy and the trauma. And so in that moment, when I finally confront the man that the evidence pointed to as Danny's actual killer, Danny was still dead. I hadn't been able to bring him back. I went to the depths of hell in Guantanamo Bay, the darkest of the abyss, and I still couldn't bring Danny back. And so I came back to the United States and was left, with this grief. And I met this great psychologist, Orly Petter, after I wrote a piece for the Washingtonian about this experience. And Orly is so smart because she knows about trauma and how trauma also can be restorative. We can have a restorative response to it, or it can be exploited. And she helped me understand how there's this concept that she coined called suicidal empathy, where you end up with your empathy so hijacked by propaganda and ideologues that you do things that are against your own interest. And that's what I truly believe America has done in the Democratic Party, getting in bed with the Islamists and the feminist movement, aligning with somebody like Linda Sarsour. It's suicidal empathy, and they exploit that loneliness that you guys talked about, in the podcast, guilt, shame, all of these emotions in order to shut you down, in your critical thinking, because ultimately when you think about the contradictions of these alliances, you question them. And that's what they don't want us to do.
So you found the nexus between radical Islam slash, just radical Islam and, Islamism, political Islam, and the left. And then what happened? They turned on you, didn't they?
They did. Since I walked through the front door of my mosque, I started getting these attacks that I thought were just really odd, because I thought it was common sense that a person should be able to walk through the front door of a building in America, that they should be able to be equal. But in fact, this was, a closely held belief within my Muslim establishment that women had to be separate. And then I talked honestly about having had my son. And boy, that really made them angry, because here I was as a woman saying, I'm not going to live in shame, and I'm not going to raise my baby in shame. And I live in the United States of America, and I have a right to live, with my head held high. But I got told things, Victoria, like, you should actually go to the women's section of the mosque and sit in the corner, and for the rest of your life, pray for forgiveness, for this crime of having had a baby outside of marriage. And I said, no, because I knew through my pregnancy, like the heavy toll that shame can take on our spirit. I cried every day of the pregnancy because I thought I had failed. I thought I had disappointed, my entire community and my family, and I failed within my religion. But it was my parents, my mom. I came back to West Virginia, and she'd take me on long walks and literally would say to me things like, you don't live in a village, Asra, you live in America. And my dad, he had paint underneath his fingernails, building this extra room into the house so that I'd have a home in this world for my son and myself.
Wow.
And
wow.
They are the living embodiment of the best of religion, the best of human beings. Never, ever for a moment use shame. But then when I started writing about these issues and laying claim to our fundamental human rights, to dignity, the men came after me. And I was and most, just ugly attacks. Like one guy I'll never forget, he said anonymously, you should give your baby up for adoption to a nuclear family, a mom and a dad. You failed your baby. And I was like, okay, this is not happening.
Yeah. And you sit in the corner, pal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they didn't like, right? Like a quote, woman of color, a brown woman from within the community, was telling them that I had my right. And that's the thing, Victoria, like that day that you got to go to the mosque, we laugh about those moments, because on Interfaith Day, it's like the white women and the white men get like, equal participation. The white women, usually as brown women, were put in the back. But then on Interfaith Day, the Jewish and Christian women get to go into the front of the mosque. And we love that day because all of a sudden we can sneak up there. But this network came after me. They called me Zionist media whore because I had supported my friend Danny, and I stood by the state of Israel as having a right to exist, just like me as a mom. And they were just so fierce. I'll never forget, Victoria. One day, I just couldn't write anymore, because This is the insidious psychological power of this kind of propaganda, and you guys talked about it in that podcast, demonization. And that the weapon of demonization to make you silence yourself, to create a prison for yourself of shame. And I had my parents all the time, my mom telling me, just write, keep writing. And that network is in the heart of this book. It's the woke army, because what they did is they put out then a battalion of these propagandists and character assassins against people like myself, Muslim reformers like Zuhdi Jasser, ex-Muslims like Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And their intention was singular, to discredit us so that they could have more power in American society.
You said that they went after Steve Emerson first, I believe. And,
yes.
I used to consult his website all the time. What's the update on him?
Oh my gosh. So Steve Emerson is such a perfect example of them destroying a man. Steve Emerson was a reporter for CNN, right? He was a journalist, and he was one of the first people, really the first person, to connect the dots on the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist movement in America. He told me the story that he was just walking by a convention center and just saw this convention, and being a great journalist, he walked inside. Well, he was enemy number one for this woke army, especially of the Islamists, because he was doing the reporting. And Steve ended up exposing their money, their operations, their network, their propaganda. And they had to take him out. And so Steve has been a casualty. He keeps doing his work, which is really, really important work. But they have effectively turned him into persona non grata, on TV and elsewhere. And yeah, he's had his slip up, here and there about the way
getting stuff wrong,
me characterizing things. But they sure as heck have. They they have gaslit America, and yet they're on TV all the time, right? And that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to flip it so that their demagoguery would become nothing in America, and that demagogue would be somebody like Steve Emerson, and then even me. And so I'm so glad that you brought up Steve, because he is a casualty of this woke army's assault on anybody who dares to challenge their narrative.
Yeah. Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch, now a colleague over at PJ Media. I mean, I was like, what's his byline showing up over here for? Because they tried to destroy him.
Yeah.
you know.
And so what happened is, I'm gonna read this one paragraph, because writing this paragraph, it took so much reporting to get to this point. But it's chapter 6, and it's called "Launching a Disinformation Website." At 8:38 p.m. on April Fool's Day, 2009, a young man used the name Zuhair Thomas to register a new account on GoDaddy, one of the many new internet service providers that had emerged in the 1990s. Zuhair Thomas was shopper ID 27179307 in GoDaddy's system. And who was he actually? So this was my tactic. This woke army lies about us. And in the United States of America, defamation is not protected speech. So I filed a lawsuit, Victoria, in Fairfax County, Virginia, in 2018, because that website that this Zuhair Thomas created, called loonwatch.com, they said that I was paid by the government of Israel. A factual error.
Yep.
And that I used that to argue that it was defamation. And my lawsuit was against John Doe's because the people on this website, Loonwatch, can't believe this. Once I figured it out, they use the names of fish as their monikers. So American Soul, Danios, Garibaldi, these are all the names of fish that people don't really know. I know. Can you believe?
Yeah.
I called a fish expert just to confirm. And I know, because we do our reporting.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm going to tell folks who was behind this, but I want you to read the book, because when you see how they operate, which you're going to learn turning the pages, is I got, as a result of that lawsuit, subpoena power. I love it. Oh my gosh. Subpoena power to
mutual discovery.
Yes. And I got to file a subpoena with the internet service providers. They're the platforms that gave these people this anonymous character, this anonymity. So Twitter, Facebook, Google, GoDaddy, because they had registered Loonwatch at GoDaddy. And what happens in court in the United States is that GoDaddy sends a message to the client and says, there's a subpoena. The client has the right to try to quash the subpoena, but nobody tried to quash it.
Really?
And I got 500 pages of the back end data on their account.
Whoa, no wonder you knew so much about those guys. So-and-so used this Visa card. It was his wife's card. Stuff like that.
Yeah. And where did it go? The Visa card belonged to a man named Ahmed Rehab, a man that I knew very well because he was part of the woke army, the Islamist. He is the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Chicago. He has been a member of CARE National. He has been part of this disinformation in the public sphere, but behind the scenes, he ran this secret operation of character assassins using the names of fish to go after Steve Emerson, Robert Spencer, me, Ayan Hersey Ali, Zuhdi Jasser, and what else? This is so important. The United States of America. And in their crosshairs was the state of Israel, because that was their ultimate objective. That is their ultimate objective, to destroy Israel. And then they shifted also to my native country, India. And they started going after the nation of India and Hindus. And so, wow, in those 500 pages, you cannot even imagine the day that I looked at those. I was ecstatic and I wanted to cry, because I finally...
You let me down. You let me down, Karen. Weren't you supposed to be a civil rights organizations for Muslims? Yeah, you fakers.
Yeah, because they were the first people. Exactly, Victoria. They were the first people that I called when the men at my mosque wouldn't let me in through the front door because they claimed to be a civil rights organization. I filed a complaint with them on civil rights. And I got a call from one of the men who knows about this Loonwatch operation, who was engaged with it, Ibrahim Hooper, their communications guy. And he told me,
Ibrahim Hooper,
he told me, you need to find a new mosque. And I'm like, what? So, you're not going to defend my rights? He's like, we are the Council on American Islamic Relations, not Islamic relations.
That's a narrative version of your skirt was too short.
Right. You're just unbelievable. And so, oh my gosh, Victoria, I went from being the hunted to the hunter, and just sitting here before you, talking to you about it, I can't even be, I know that you must know empathically, what I'm going through, but in order to, it's been a 20-year journey, coming to it. As long as I have raised my child, it's taken to write this book and to report it, because it took so much to challenge them, even as they tried to tell you that you're a zero, right? In society.
Right.
Nothing.
Right. Oh,
yeah.
And how many times have I been told you're a loser? You're ugly. You're this, it's like, oh, shut up. I've been called worse by better people than you is what I frankly tell people.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Did you always have that strength?
No, I mean, I find as a talk show host, you bring up topics, you bring up things, you come to a viewpoint, and people want to attack you for it. I was for 20 years a talk show host in Portland, and you want to talk about being on the outs? Whew. Christian, conservative in Portland, with only 17% people going to church, and being in basically the belly of the beast. I mean, right. and after 9/11, and we found out, my father of a child at the school where my daughter went, was a bankroller. He was a guy who he gave money to the jihad. Oh. And it was there were 6, the Portland 6. They came out of one mosque in Portland. It was like, yeah, this is not right. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
Muhammad, the Christmas tree bomber, they caught him in time. Kind of want to revisit that case now after I've seen what the FBI does to the January 6th people, setting up and stuff, and the the Gretchen Whitmer case. Kind of want to see what I went to every day of that trial, and I paid attention to the evidence and their use of informants, and, the fact that CHSs and all sort of folks working with the FBI. So I saw the evidence there, and I believe at the time that it was persuasive, definitely. I mean, they didn't do anything. They had him do everything. He had to buy everything, all the bomb making equipment, and he had to do all that stuff. But he was a young, stupid kid. And I just kind of wonder, I kind of want to go back there and just re-examine that. Maybe I'll talk to him. I was his bête noire. They hated me. But I bring this question to you, and that is, do you feel physically that your life is in danger?
Well, I don't know. You don't know, because you don't know what you will trigger in others with the truth. And I have friends who say that if they don't hear from me in a couple of days, they're always going to check on me. Mm. My mom checks on me. And I do want to live. My dear friend Danny, just weeks before he was kidnapped, I asked him, do you want to go to Afghanistan? And he said, I'm eager to go to Afghanistan, but I'm not eager to die. And, he was he was no cowboy. He was a really good, solid journalist. And I too want to live. And yet I also know that the truth is something that we have to present, even when we face these dangers, and just be smart about the risks that we face. I try to have good threat assessment, as they say. Mm-hmm. But, oh my goodness, Victoria, I ended up exposing one man last week on Twitter, and in a piece in this publication in the UK called Unheard, which is a great publication for voices that are not allowed to be expressed in United States media sometimes. And this is a man named Javad Hashmi. He was Danios on Loon Watch. He has even admitted it now, because he had a debate with Robert Spencer, who, if people don't know him, he has a website called Jihad Watch. And Robert Spencer is definitely, not subtle about his criticism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he has the courage to speak by his own name, right? And to write with his own name. And again, in this nexus of the left and the Islamists, who is it that one of the first groups that went after Robert Spencer? I don't know if you remember this, but it was the American Library Association. Do you know that?
No, that makes so much
Yeah.
sense, though. I mean, it's this
Doesn't it?
whole nexus with the left. ALA
Yeah.
is just one of, they're the biggest censors. They're the so-called Library Association, and they're the biggest censors and most leftist people, I think, around, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. And now a lot of parents know about them because the American Library Association is supporting all of these ideologues as they
Yeah.
are trying to indoctrinate children with age inappropriate books. I'm not puritanical about sexuality or identity issues, but I am a mom and I do know age appropriate,
Yep.
and the American Library Association went after Robert Spencer as CARE was doing this and this secret website, Loonwatch. And guess what I found in GoDaddy? Right there in the accounts that this young man, Zuhair, who was actually Mohammed Tausif Akbar, a research director at CARE, Chicago, he had also bought SpencerWatch.com. So they had this entire machine. And this young man, Javad Hashmi, ended up taking this fish name of Danios to go after Robert Spencer. And last year, he had a debate, the year before actually, he had a debate with Robert Spencer, but with his real name, because guess where Javad Hashmi has been getting his PhD?
Where?
Harvard University.
Holy Moses.
Yeah. While he's been running this secret character assassination campaign against Muslim reformers, against ex-Muslims, against America itself, against the state of Israel, he has been getting his PhD at Harvard. And where does he work now? He works at the Muslim Public Affairs Council, another organization in this Muslim establishment that
the constellation of alphabet names.
Exactly.
The Holy Land Foundation case is the one that really sort of blew the doors off of our knowledge base. The whole list of, there's CARE, I can't remember all the different ones at the drop of a hat right now, but they're all related. They're all the same people.
Right. And they don't want you to remember. That's the whole thing. I
have it written down somewhere.
Oh, yeah. And it's all in the book. It's all in a directory that I've created of, a list. Yeah. And I haven't
seen that yet. Okay.
Yeah. I am going to, and what have they done? What have they done? They've rebranded. So again, across Wahhabi corridor here, I have a chapter in the book that I call 500 Grove Street, because that's where Holy Land had its hub. That's the building in which the Muslim Brothers created the base for this alphabet soup of organizations. And what did they do? They raised money from these governments, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and now Turkey. And they put that money into where? Places like Georgetown University.
Oh, absolutely. Buying off higher education, just like the Chinese are doing.
Yes. And now, also in the book, I expose how it is that Georgetown University has as one of its programs this lovely sounding organization called the Bridge Initiative. And what is the Bridge Initiative? It is just a targeted character assassination campaign against the same targets that Loonwatch and CARE had been waging their war against. So they went from the secret underbelly, of the internet with their fake operation into institutions and establishments. One of the characters, Wajahat Ali, he's a columnist. He's a contributor to the New York Times. So they went from being discredited legitimately for issues of sexism and intolerance to now discrediting folks who have been calling them out and now becoming a part of American establishment like the Democratic Party and the New York Times and the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yeah. Civilizational jihad is that's really what that is. And that's not an accident. That's by design. Tell me a little bit about what your findings were on the Southern Poverty Law Center. They are so odious now. I mean, I can remember back in the day, such a wonderful organization, and they really took the little guy position, and they have just turn themselves upside down, inside out, and now I believe are the predators.
Oh, they are the predators. That's such a good way of putting it. So one of the most notorious, mess ups that they did is that they did a hit piece for these Islamists. And they went after Ayaan Hirsi Ali, an ex-Muslim author who has faced death threats and the loss of a friend of hers to murder.
Theo Van Gogh.
Theo Van Gogh in the Netherlands,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did those assailants use as their inspiration for killing Theo Van Gogh? But my friend Danny Pearl's murder, So she was inspired to action by tragedy, as I was, and Ayaan has stood up, and she has also evolved where she had no hope for Muslim reform. She's now one of the strongest supporters of our efforts to challenge interpretation so that we can move into an Islam of grace and women's rights, human rights, secular governance. This is a big fundamental idea
Huge.
for us.
Yes.
Huge idea. Well,
needs a reformation.
Yeah. And where did I get the idea for reformation from, but Christianity and Judaism, because
Absolutely.
every religion has had to evolve. And Southern Poverty Law Center went after Ayaan, called her anti-Muslim, and they went after this other man named Majid Nawaz, and he's Muslim.
He's the guy who got all the good stuff, right?
Well, he ended up threatening a lawsuit. And they were in a lot of internal trouble. We didn't know this at the time. They folded immediately because they didn't want discovery. And they gave him a big payout of $3 million for their defamation of him. And that is the downfall of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Exactly. Like they were a model, right, of supposed liberal values also. But now they are the tyrants. You are absolutely right. They are just ruthless in trying to shut us up. And why? Because they have gotten in bed with people who are bigots, racist, sexist, people who literally believe that being gay is punishable by death. You can have whatever moral position you want on issues of sexuality. That's the freedom of having thought, but making it a state crime, that's unacceptable, right? No matter what you believe about that life path. And how is it that they are with people who are such homophobes, sexist?
Yeah. And then they call out people. That organization is anti-gay. And it's like, first of all, what the hell are you talking about? Second of all, I can't remember, a particular case at the moment, but this has happened a lot. And then what are they doing? They're doing it themselves.
Yeah, because, they're going after Christian groups, for example, all the time. And you have a target on one religion, and yet you're in bed with Muslim supremacists. Muslims who do believe in Muslim nationalism, you're going after Christian nationalists and ignoring and accepting people who believe in Muslim nationalism. That's the contradiction. And ultimately, as you know, follow the money. It's money. They are getting funded to do these kind of reports on people like Ayaan and Majid Nawaz in order to discredit them. And the Southern Poverty Law Center is now also enmeshed with this organization that I also expose in the book called Rethink Media. Rethink Media is created, of course, at Berkeley by some far-left activists, and their entire strategy is a communications war, a propaganda war. And they literally have hubs, in which they then send messages out. And who have they hired? But people from the Council on American Islamic Relations. And that has been, I call this thing woke washing, where you, where you end up, cleaning up the image of people who are pretty illiberal. And that's what they've done with these Islamists. And it's really dangerous. That's why I spent so many years on the book, is because, as you discussed in that podcast, like, information is power. Disinformation is even more power. And demonization discredits and creates a target. Like, otherwise, why would you ask me, if I have a threat, a physical threat on me? Is because ultimately they want to demonize a human being so that they can be seen as a legitimate target to take out. And that's what they did with Danny Pearl. They demonized him for being a Jew, an American, a grandson of Israel, and I saw that, I saw how lethal it was. And that's why I just, as long as my son has been alive, been working on this, because we have to just inoculate people, right? That's the intention here, is to inoculate people with knowledge, so that they will not not to have their brains hijacked by these folks.
Well, this is a perfect way to sort of wrap up. Your son, the one that you've been protecting for all these years, that your parents have protected, they've been Muslims from India, and how they just embraced him, and how you have gone to the mat for your son in the Virginia schools, or at least in his name. I think he was out of the schools by the time you started your effort to bring meritocracy back. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know, you're time's probably short, but it's a thing. It's a full circle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a complete full circle. And I'm so glad we're going on that journey together here, because how is it that, I end up fighting Islamists and then fighting for merit in our school system? It's because for the woke army, merit must be destroyed. Because with merit, you get people who are literate. They have health literacy. They have political literacy. They are an educated citizenry, right? And they are not as malleable then to indoctrination and propaganda. And so for the woke army, from the madrasas that spawned young boys to become suicide bombers, to our K through 12 system that is now indoctrinating children to tell their parents that they want, mastectomies, right? And complete hormonal change in their childhood. This is an assault on children. And the war on merit is part of their strategy, because when they can dumb down our kids, they have more pliable victims, right? And targets. And so when I saw in the summer of 2020 that they were using critical race theory to be the Trojan horse, through which they were going to get change in our school system. You know what I did, Victoria? I went back to every character in the book, and I researched them and their intersection with critical race theory. It just blew my mind.
Absolutely wonderful to go back and read that. Yeah. Everybody should read this book, Woke Army.
Because what I learned is that the woke army racializes everything in order to get our defenses down, right? And to shame us. And that's what the Muslim extremists and radicals have done in order to shut us up. And that is what they have done in order to make us, shame us when we stand up for merit. They want to say, what are you, racist? You don't want, Black and Hispanic kids to move forward. And of course we do. Of course we want all children to move forward. But they create this schism because ultimately their intention is sectarianism. And that's what brought me into this fight as a new mother in 2023. I wanted to fight the sectarianism that had killed my friend Danny. And today, as a mom, I want to fight the sectarianism that's laying claim to our kids. And that's the connective tissue in all of this.
You're a woman who refuses to be shamed by someone else who is not over her. And I appreciate that about you. I have a couple more questions. Isn't it ironic that Ayaan Hirsi Ali came to prominence in our collective knowledge base because of what happened to Theo Van Gogh, but also her talk and discussion writings about being a victim of genital mutilation by the Islamists. Here we are, and this country is endorsing genital mutilation. What happened there?
Well, it's that hijacking of the mind. It is truly a perfect example of how our common sense, which is, defined like the way our brain works. It's the prefrontal, right, that they talk about. It's your cerebral thinking. They say that that's logic, rational thought, common sense. And then the emotion is in the back of the brain. Well, they hijack our brains so that they use excuses like, well, if we allow female genital mutilation a little bit, like a little nick, then it'll make people feel like they're able to culturally express themselves in America. And you're like, no, this is wrong. Like, you cannot lay bare a girl, spread her legs. Like, it's just, I'm getting into that level of detail because that is
you have to. No, you have to.
That is what happens. Pull down her underwear and then cut at the most intimate place in her body. This is not okay. Yeah. It should repulse everybody to think about that image, because that is what the American Pediatric Association tried to put out there. They tried to be culturally responsive. And this is that moral relativism that is, the hijacking of the mind and the spirit and the soul then, because you throw your values out. You throw out your values that children are innocent, that a girl should not have her private area mutilated, touched, operated upon. And can you believe right now, I couldn't believe this when I saw this the other day. In Indonesia, they're having an entire conference on what they call female circumcision. Well, it's not female circumcision. This is genital mutilation. And who is it that came after Ayaan Hirsi Ali on this point? Linda Sarsour, the queen of the Women's March and the new left in America and its idea of feminism, just speaking so cruelly about the surgery, that the mutilation that Ayaan had experienced. But again, to your point about not living with shame, Ayaan has, continued to be a fighter through this foundation she created called the AHA Foundation. And she's fighting these laws like that and trying to put in place laws that ban this kind of practice. And like you said, it's an uphill battle. Like, not everybody, it's like, it should be common sense, but the lobby, this woke lobby is fighting her.
Oh, wow. That's unusual for her to be in that position. I mean, honestly, because she's just been on the other side for so long.
She's been a target, she's been a target of them to censor her from Brandeis University to Yale University. And she is somebody that they went after big, because one of the things that really threatens the Islamists is atheism. And so they went after the atheists in the United States, like Bill Maher, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins in the UK, and Ayaan, because they offer people an exit ramp, from this kind of indoctrination that scares the heck out of them. Yeah. And that's why Ayaan became such a target.
Could you explain Ilhan Omar? How is it that she's so far left? She wears a headdress. She does all that stuff. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, she had an affair with her communications consultant.
Married her brother.
Yeah, allegedly, right? I'm still chasing those facts down, but absolutely, was paying her communications consultant as she was having an affair with him and then marrying him. Well, she is the inheritor of this new alliance. She is the beneficiary of it, and she perpetuates it. One of the chapters in the book that chronicles, this moment that should have been so clarifying for people is one in which, she's spewed all this anti-Semitism, right? And I go to Washington, D.C. then, and go down Route 7, Wahhabi corridor, go along the Potomac, end up at in front of the Supreme Court, where the Council on American Islamic Relations and the woke army have come together for a press conference to support Ilhan Omar. And who's there from both sides? The Council on American Islamic Relations, like I said, Linda Sarsour, and this organization called Jewish Voice for Peace, that wants the destruction of Israel.
Yeah.
So what is their defense? What is their defense to Ilhan Omar? That America is Islamophobic. So
Yes.
they use this shield again. That
She's an odious woman.
Yeah, that it's racist. And I walked with them. I have covered so many lobbying events in D.C. I remember the bike lobby, the Israel lobby, so many people. And I know how Washington works. Well, can you believe it that this troop, this band of the woke army, walking through the corridors of Congress, they're about to go into Rashida Tlaib's office. And I'm just there with my camera and my pen as my only weapons, right? I'm a good, foot shorter than the men, way shorter than even many of the women. And Linda Sarsour turns to her lieutenants there and says in Arabic, "Don't let her in." And they body block me from Rashida Tlaib's office.
Jeez.
Putting their shoulders into me, claiming that I'm pulling the woman's hijab, which she's like a foot taller than me. I couldn't even get to if I wanted. And just when you watch this video, it's on my Twitter feed and on my YouTube channel. It'll disturb you about the power that they have in the halls of Congress. And that's Ilhan Omar. That is Ilhan Omar. And that is this lobby that has used the Democratic Party to get into political power. And they have been doing it with political contributions across Wahhabi corridor here at 500 Grove Street, brought people into office. And it is a web that we must untangle if we want to protect America and America's kids. We have to dismantle it.
Well, thank you so much for all of your efforts on all of the above that we've spent over an hour discussing today. I so appreciate you, Asra Nomani, and your effectiveness, your courage, and your tenacity. Thanks for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We can win. I know we can win.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1ACast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.